Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Mega Projects. Today, not a specific aircraft for you, but something I'm sure you are going to like. And also you clicked on this video, so you're probably interested in it. Welcome to Mega Projects. It's all about hypersonic aircraft. Let's jump in. For most of history, the only place that humans could travel at hyper speed was in science fiction. Whether you prefer Star Trek or Star Wars, obviously Star Trek. Countless people have looked on in envy as their favorite characters blast off with unimaginable velocity, crossing the galaxy in a matter of seconds. That definitely didn't happen in Star Trek. It's like the galaxy was really big. There was a whole series based around them taking like 70 years to get home. I loved that series, Star Trek Voyager. Woo! But while humans may never reach the same speeds as Han Solo, hypersonic air travel may not be as far away as you think. On October the 14th, 1947, humankind broke the sound barrier for the first time. The Bell X-1, flown by Major Charles E. Yeager of the US Air Force, reached supersonic speed in the skies above the United States. Yet even before Yeager's flight, engineers worldwide, urged by their governments, were looking into more ambitious velocities. Hypersonic flight is achieved at Mach-5. That's 6,170 kilometers an hour, or 3,840 miles per hour. Traveling at such speeds presents a lot of different problems of physics, thermodynamics, and aerodynamics. Engineers have mostly cracked the code for unmanned spaceplanes or missiles to reach hypersonic speeds, but reaching that speed in a crewed aircraft at lower altitudes is an entirely different beast of a challenge. Now today, hypersonic weaponry is on the brink of becoming mainstream, but hypersonic passenger planes have seemingly been just beyond the reach of humankind for the last half-century. In recent years, though, it's begun to seem closer than ever. Several manufacturers have claimed that by 2030 or 2040, we'll be able to fly across the Pacific in just 3 hours. But today, we're going to look at a few aircraft to successfully fly at hypersonic speeds, and one or two that might well do so in the near future. Before America broke the sound barrier, the Nazis and the Soviets were already looking into hypersonic aircrafts. In all likelihood, engineers had dreamt of such speed since the earliest planes carried humans across wheat fields. But perhaps the first detailed plans for such a vehicle came out of the Third Reich. I can't imagine so many people watching the right do their flight thing and being like, you know, it'd be cool? That, but at 5,000 miles an hour. In the 1930s, two German engineers named Eugen Sanger and Irene Brett began working on the Silbervogel, or Silver Bird, a plane whose ambitions far outstrip current physics and material science. The Nazi regime was interested in a bomber that could strike America, taking off from continental Europe, crossing the Atlantic quickly, delivering the weapon, and then continuing on to Japanese positions, all in a single day. Sanger and Brett's conception incorporated cutting-edge rocket technology with the principle of the lifting body to reach incredible speeds. In some ways, their idea was sound. One of the main problems with hypersonic flight is that an engine or aircraft that can reach supersonic speeds isn't ideal for reaching hypersonic speeds. Hypersonic planes need one type of propulsion to get them to supersonic and another for hypersonic. Now today, the most common propulsion is a rocket. In that way, Sanger and Brett showed a sound understanding of the system used for later hypersonic projects like the X-20 Dinosaur and the Space Shuttle of the 1970s. Made videos on both of those previously. Not sure if the Dinosaur one will be out yet because I super recently recorded that, and I'm not sure if this video will go out first because it doesn't always work out correct. Sanger's 900-page report on the plan detailed a process of launching the plane from a 3-kilometer sled, ascending to over 140 kilometers, and reaching speeds of up to 21,800 kilometers an hour. The idea was considered too complex to pursue, and the report was too long to read, so the design never reached the mock-up phase. After the fall of Nazi Germany, Stalin got his hands on the report. Soviet engineers began pursuing the design, calling it the Kaldish bomber. This aircraft carried many of the same principles as the Silver Bird, like the rocket-powered sled launch, but the astronomical fuel costs rendered the project simply impossible. The Soviet Union would build some of the fastest supersonic aircraft of all time, but their work on hypersonic planes came to an end. Around this time, America first broke the sound barrier in a crewed aircraft, but they were pursuing much faster speeds. In 1949, the RTV G4 bumper became the first manufactured object to go hypersonic. The rocket reached Mach 6.7, about 8,300 kilometers an hour. But that vehicle was unmanned. The first human to reach the speed was Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. Gagarin went hypersonic during a piloted orbital flight. In May of 1961, Alan Shepard eclipsed Mach-5 when his space capsule re-entered the atmosphere. But the Americans sought that speed in an aircraft instead of a spacecraft falling from the thermosphere. In doing so, they would have to overcome some incredible challenges. For instance, the heat generated by the friction between air and a high-speed plane is enough to combust most normal aircraft. This was even the case with the first hypersonic object, the bumper, which burst into flames on atmospheric re-entry. Building usable hypersonic aircraft would require materials that could withstand up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. One way to combat this issue is to fly at great altitudes, often exceeding 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. At this height, the laws of aerodynamics differ dramatically from those at 10 to 15 kilometers. Now, despite all of these challenges, by late 1961, the Americans achieved the first crewed hypersonic flight. The X-15 was an experimental aircraft operated by NASA and the US Air Force. Designed in the late 1950s, the rocket-powered X-15 had a long, cylindrical body and prominent dorsal and ventral fins. The aircraft was built to be carried by a B-52 Stratofortress, then drop-launched. Typically, the X-15 would be lifted to about 14 kilometers and speeds of 800 kilometers an hour before it was released from its mothership. Other altitudes of launches were also tested. Once dropped, the plane would activate its liquid propellant rocket engine. An early version of this plane used the XLR-11 engine, which could produce 16,000 pounds force. That's compared to 6,000 pounds force produced by the engine in the first supersonic plane. By 1960, though, Reaction Motors built the XLR-99, which generated 57,000 pounds force of thrust. Now, instead of two XLR-11s, the X-15 was outfitted with a single XLR-99. Without this main engine running, the X-15 was incapable of maintaining altitude. Aside from its advanced engine, the X-15 had a handful of other interesting features. For instance, given the incredible altitude of flight, there wasn't enough air to use flight control surfaces, like rudder for steering. Instead, the plane was outfitted with a reaction control system using rocket thrusters to adjust direction. Most of the plane's surface was covered with nickel alloy, a heat-resistant material to sustain the temperatures at such high speeds. The plane even came with an ejection seat, though it only worked below Mach 4 and altitudes below 37 kilometers an hour. Good lord, can you imagine ejecting? Ejecting from a plane is insane enough. Ejecting from a plane traveling just below Mach 4? Gonna be crazy. On November 9th, 1961, the X-15 became the first human-crewed aircraft to break the hypersonic barrier. It reached 6,585 kilometers an hour, higher than Mach 6 at an altitude of 31 kilometers. In July of 1963, the pilot, Joe Walker, brought the X-15 more than 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. 8 pilots flew 13 flights more than 80 kilometers above the world, each one earning astronaut wings for their efforts. In 1967, William Knight flew the fastest flight, reaching Mach 6.7 or 7,270 kilometers an hour. Since then, no crewed, powered aircraft has ever exceeded this speed. Still, despite the impressive velocity, the plane could only maintain such extremes for short periods. On one occasion, the aircraft entered a hypersonic spin while descending. The airframe shattered at 18 kilometers above the Earth, killing the pilot and scattering wreckage across 130 square kilometers. Despite this crash, the X-15 is, to this day, the most successful crewed hypersonic plane. In the 60 years since the X-15, the only vehicles to break its speed have been unmanned. In fact, there have been too many crewless spaceplanes to discuss in this video. Most hypersonic aircraft have been built exclusively for military or scientific purposes, and only a select few qualify as airplanes instead of spaceplanes. For our purposes, we're considering those that reached hypersonic speed below the Kármán line, that's 100 kilometers above the Earth, marking the outer limit of where space begins. One example is the NASA X-43. Today, the X-43 is the fastest aircraft ever recorded at about Mach 9.6 or 12,000 kilometers an hour. The X-43 was, of course, unmanned. Like its ancestor, the X-15, the X-43 was dropped from a B-52 during its record-breaking flight in 2004. But the X-43 story is quite different from its predecessor. 3 planes were built, and each one was flown once. The first test of the X-43A took place in 2001. After 10 seconds on the initial flight, the booster lost control, causing the plane to veer off path. It was destroyed by the Air Force immediately to limit collateral damage. The next test wasn't until March of 2004, and the third was in November of that same year. The final test showed some promising results. Not only did the plane reach incredible speeds, but it did so at 33.5 kilometers. While flying at higher altitudes makes high velocities easier, future commercial users will likely operate around the 30-kilometer high mark. The most recent success in NASA's X series was the Boeing X-51 Wave Rider. The Wave Rider relies on a different type of propulsion than the X-15 or X-43. It's based on a scramjet engine. Scramjets are supersonic combustion ramjets, an air-breathing engine in which combustion takes place in supersonic airflow. Today's scramjets are the favorite propulsion system for most hypersonic aircraft. In 2010, the X-51 completed its first successful hypersonic flight, reaching Mach-5 at just 21,000 meters. Most importantly, in 2013, the X-51 achieved the longest ever powered hypersonic flight, sustaining flight for more than 6 minutes, including 210 seconds above Mach-5. Like its predecessors, the X-51 is drop-launched from 15 kilometers by a B-52. While the X-51 has shown the unique ability to use its engines for an extended time, the next step will be managing a launch without the help of a B-52. This is where the scramjet might not suffice. As we mentioned, the engine requires supersonic airflow to function, possibly requiring a second propulsion system. Of course, the United States isn't the only country that's integrated hypersonic aircraft into its arsenal. In fact, Russia and China are rumored to have more advanced high-speed technology. However, these countries utilize hypersonic rockets for ICBM and other types of projectiles, many of which leave the Earth's atmosphere after launch. The most widely publicized of these secretive weapons is the Avangard, a kind of hypersonic glide vehicle that can deliver nuclear weapons. While the Avangard holds no future promise as a passenger vehicle, it's supposedly capable of speeds over Mach 20. Whether the Russians have ever reached such a velocity is unknown. China is said to be right alongside Russia in producing some of the highest speed vehicles in the world, though both countries seem to be concerned with any sort of crude variations. If the world sees hypersonic planes carrying humans, it's probably going to come from the United States. Since the first hypersonic flight in 1961, aircraft manufacturers have claimed that hypersonic travel is just around the corner. Despite decades of advancements, we still haven't rounded that corner. However, recent developments in the industry have reinforced the belief that that day is fast approaching. Most of these developments have been in the military industry. Lockheed Martin has claimed for some time that they're on the verge of early test flights with the SR-72. While the son of Blackbird, which we've already done a video about, is an unmanned vehicle, it's an excellent example of the recent advances that make hypersonic aircraft more likely than ever. According to the company's vice president, the SR-72 would have been impossible without 3D printing, which allows the company to embed a cooling system inside the engine. Advanced computer modeling has vastly reduced the price of testing possible designs, as have military-grade wind turbines. As for more accessible examples, the company at the forefront is Boeing. In 2018, the company released renderings of crewed aircraft for military and commercial purposes. These models show a plane with a sleek, dramatic delta wing, a compact fuselage, a sharp nose, and 2 rear fins. Along with these designs, Boeing laid out some of the development plans. These plans show some crucial characteristics of hypersonic air travel that will likely permeate through other companies' attempts to introduce hypersonic. The plane will be built to max out at around Mach 5. That's because at Mach 5, the temperatures that the jet will experience are significantly lower than those at 6, 7, or 8. As such, Boeing's plane can be made entirely of titanium instead of more expensive and labor-intensive materials. Boeing also plans to reveal a different form of propulsion. Rather than just a scramjet engine, the plane would include a jet and a ramjet. The jet would get the aircraft to Mach 2 or 3, while the ramjet takes the plane the rest of the way. As for dimensions, Boeing stated that they haven't quite decided what size it will be, though they expect it to be smaller than a 737. The plane would fly at about 29 kilometers, reducing turbulence and allowing the engines to operate efficiently. The experience for passengers would be considerably different from the typical airliner or even supersonic passenger jets like the Concorde. Not only could Boeing's plane hypothetically cross the Atlantic in 2 hours, but the G-force at takeoff would continue for 12 minutes. As you may know, on current airplanes, it typically lasts a couple of seconds. However, However, thanks to the altitude, the cruising flight would be incomparably smooth. Window seats would also go for a premium, as passengers would be able to see the Earth's curvature out the window. The aircraft likely wouldn't be particularly fuel efficient, but with such incredible speeds and little air resistance, physicists believe that a hypersonic plane could coast for the final 800 kilometers of a flight without even using the engines. Companies including Boeing are reluctant to provide concrete estimates as to when this type of plane could be ready, and understandably so. It'll undoubtedly take decades to reach a point of widespread commercial use. Aggressive estimates believe that the earliest prototypes could be flying in the next 5 to 10 years. Perhaps like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, we'll be able to fly at hypersonic speeds at some point during our lifetimes. I mean, it's right around the corner. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.